I have a question for you. What do you see when you look at the poster for the newest MCU film, at least at the time of this video, Thunderbolts? It's actually out of the ordinary for most MCU posters. In the past, we had more of something called a character pile poster that suggested the hierarchy of importance, so to speak. The big characters like Iron Man, Captain America, they would have the larger heads in the character pile, and as we went up the character pile, characters got smaller. On the other hand, in Thunderbolts, we didn't have a character pile poster. We had, I don't know, for lack of a better term, more of like a character carpet for the poster. All of the members of Thunderbolts, their heads pretty much the same size throughout the poster, laid out like a carpet. And I think, after watching the film, I came to the conclusion that actually this film is a mirror of what it's like to live in a big city. And trust me, if you come to Tokyo, even for just a visit, you will be overwhelmed by the enormity of the crowds everywhere you go. And it's something that can really give you a lot of tension if you're not used to living in such an environment. But as cities all around the world are getting larger and larger, we really should think about how to understand this type of living experience so that we can take care of ourselves as well as take care of other people. So after the initial reactions, at least that I had while watching the film, of good lord, all the action sequences feel the same, all of the characters speak the same, happening again and again in almost like a circle throughout the film. After those initial reactions, asking why did the fight sequences and action sequences feel the same, and why did the characters speak the same, especially in certain environments. And I think these are two questions that can lead us to a more deeper understanding of what was happening in the film. The film won me over, and I think these are some of the points why I think the film won me over. So, just from the poster itself, with, everyone really kind of this, tense struggle to inhabit a very limited amount of space, we see it play out in the fight and action sequences as well. And they basically follow a, three-step pattern, almost all the action sequences. Basically, first, there's this enter into a room. Second, there's fighting in the room, and then the third step, trying to escape the room. And if you take a look at the fight and action sequences throughout the film, they follow this three-step pattern. And on the surface, it could be something that writers and viewers of such a film would just say, no thanks, this is really not what I'm putting my money down for. But looking closer, deeper into the film as a mirror actually of our experiences living in our big cities, I think it might be Thunderbolts that is something of importance for us to take a look at beyond the scope of it as a film, and more as a kind of almost like a metaphor actually of what it means to live in a contemporary setting like Tokyo or New York or Los Angeles or Toronto. It's there, and I wonder if any of you out there who've seen the film felt the same way about Thunderbolts. So alongside this kind of repetitive pattern of action sequences of entering a room, fighting in the room, and then trying to escape the room, we also have this reoccurring dialogue pattern throughout the film as well. And what I mean is that oftentimes when the characters were together in a very closed environment, like a room or in Red Guardian's limousine, they always end up arguing and bickering and insulting each other. And they don't take any breaks with that type of conversational style. As a viewer, it could be really, really exhausting to try to sit in a theater, and try to get to a point where, okay, yeah, we get it. You guys are, don't like each other so much, but, let's get on with the story. That pattern actually does lead somewhere. And what happens is when they finally do escape the room and go outside where it's a much more open environment, like near the beginning of the film when they escape the vault and they're in the desert, or towards the end of the film when they're fighting Sentry / Void. At both ends of those conflicts, we see more of a calmer state of all the characters. For example, escaping the vault, I thought it was very interesting that Walker, U.S. agent, at the end, outside of the vault, he finds food that he wants to share with everyone, taking care of basic needs like hunger. And wow, that was I thought a really interesting contrast from all of the arguing and insulting that happened inside rooms. And then towards the end of the film, after the fighting quote unquote fighting Void, they're outside. They're outside of Avengers Tower and out in the open sky. And those are two examples of this pattern of what it's like to be inside a closed environment, and how it kind of drives the characters really kind of crazy, and then finally getting out in more open space allows them to relax. I think that mirrors what it's like to live in today's contemporary urban crowded environments. At the same time, however, there's that interesting scene where Yelena and her father finally, tell their true feelings about all of their fears and vulnerabilities. It doesn't happen inside a closed environment. It's actually outside on the street, and that's when they finally are able to bridge the gap that had built between them and reconnect as father and daughter. So while watching the film and feeling disappointed that a lot of the action sequences, fight sequences were happening inside closed environments, and suspecting that they were all designed as a matter of convenience or budget restrictions, I started to feel that actually no, maybe intentionally or unintentionally they're expressing something that's deep within our subconscious that we haven't really been able to bring out in the open and understand what's really happening to people, especially living in big cities or closed environments, whatever the case may be. And so then I think when we're aware of how the environment affects our way of thinking and feeling, I think that's the first step in actually taking care of ourselves and then taking care of others, so that we're able to not just cope with the stresses of the environment and the lifestyle we're forced to live. It's going to take work, and it's going to take just as much as it's going to take the MCU to recover it, which probably is another kind of unconscious expression of the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe being overcrowded and just exhausting, not just for viewers like us, but also for people trying to create this universe. So that brings us back to kind of the beginning of this video, talking about the poster of the film, how it's a departure from past MCU movie posters. That being, in the past, the posters were designed like a character pile, which could suggest some kind of hierarchy. The Thunderbolts poster is more like what I would term as a character carpet, which in contrast could suggest something more along the lines of a heterarchy. Heterarchy describes a system of organization where elements are not strictly ranked, or they have the potential to be ranked in multiple different ways, depending on the context or the criteria being considered. The term itself comes from the Greek heteros, meaning other or different, and archein, to rule. And the key characteristics of heterarchy are, lack of fixed ranking, distributed authority, multiple interconnections, flexibility and adaptability, context-dependent influence. And you can see that throughout the Thunderbolts, where between Yelena, and especially between Yelena and Bucky and Yelena's father, they each take their moment to shine or take initiative that brings the group together to help overcome whatever struggles they're going through. So with these few points that I've laid out here about the Thunderbolts, I think actually the film could be a standalone film if we view it as a kind of interesting take, a kind of mirror of our contemporary human experiences. Where I think, however, where the film kind of falters is in its ultimate resolution, and it's still this kind of argumentative style of communication at the climax of the film, where the Thunderbolts gather together around Bob, who's struggling with his kind of shadow self, so to speak, the void. And he says, he kind of emphasizes that he's all alone, and he can't escape this feeling of being alone. And then Yelena is the one to venture forth and embrace him and tell him that he is not alone. This kind of yes, no, or opposing viewpoints as a way of communication, I think is actually at the detriment of what the film and what we all try to do with this feeling of aloneness, even though we're surrounded by crowds of people wherever we go. This is where being a writer, this would be a really great exercise of trying to improve on that climactic moment in Thunderbolts. And I think a good example of how to really do an effective type of climactic, emotional or psychological climactic moment in any story, we can look at The Winter Soldier. That moment when Steve and Bucky are really going at it, and they're fighting. The final fight scene, and the place is falling apart, and they should just stop and escape, but Bucky just keeps hammering down on Steve Rogers, and Steve Rogers says his signature line, "I can do this all day," and he changes the depth of that his signature line. And I think that's something that the film Thunderbolts should have done at the climactic moment. Not argue that, we're all alone, but, that kind of, agree with whatever statement it is, and rather than but. And this is where I'd like to invite you to, post in the comments how you would improve on that scene based on that idea of yes and rather than yes but. So yeah, in a nutshell, those are my thoughts on the film Thunderbolts. It may not be the best film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it is still nonetheless a very interesting film that can stand alone as something that goes beyond its surface, and hints at a common human experience for all of us, that being how big cities are becoming a magnet for where everyone lives and works, and how it transforms our communities as more like captivities, where we're all pretty much animals in a zoo, so to speak. Animals in a zoo if we're not conscious or aware of what's going on. But in any case, yeah, please post in the comments how you feel about the film, how you feel about these ideas in the video. The writing prompt that I mentioned, if we go with something like The Winter Soldier, where one line, for example, "I can do this all day," takes on a different meaning at the climax that's really quite actually emotional. Can we do something like that for the film Thunderbolts as well? In any case, I really do appreciate you making it this far in the video. This has been The Right Table. Thanks again. Catch you next one.